Good morning. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to a BW Dialogue. Today, we're going to be talking to a business person, an industrialist, an entrepreneur. He also teaches in educational institutions. He's on the board of many educational institutions. But today, we are talking to him about his book. Let me welcome Dr. Naushad Forbes, who's the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, India's leading steam engineering and control instrumentation firm. Forbes Marshall has consistently been ranked amongst various parameters to be a place to work. He's also the chairman of the Ananta Aspen Center and Center for Technology Innovation and Economic Research. He's also occasionally teaches at his alma mater, which is Stanford, where he did his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degree. He has written widely on innovation. He's been very active in industry association. He served as a CII president and now an author. We're going to welcome Dr. Forbes to this conversation. And today we are going to discuss your book, The Struggle and the Promise, Restoring India's Potential. It is a thought-provoking book. It also looks at solutions. It has data, and it comes from a person who has in some way been part of building the India story. So let me welcome Dr. Naushad Forbes and start by asking him, Dr. Forbes, why this book and why now?
So thank you very much, first of all, Dr. Batra, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with you. In terms of why this book and why now, the why now question is an interesting one. For as long as I can remember, I've had this really deep belief in India's potential. And I've had this deep belief in India's potential sometimes when I'm most frustrated with what we are doing or not doing. And I'd say any day, typically, I would have something that would really enthuse me about what we've done and something that will really depress me about what we've done. And this is true, 20 years ago, it's true, 10 years ago, it's true now. The second thing was actually after my year as CI president, when I went around and met so many people in different members of CI, but also people in other countries, people in our government at all levels. And I just came away from this same reconviction of potential and this reconviction that there was just so much that we could do. And then the third why now bit is actually the pandemic. But when the pandemic hit and I wasn't traveling at all, I said, if I don't write the book now, I'm never going to write it. So in a sense, the why now question gets answered by saying, look, I actually committed to writing the book with the publisher in 2019. And then I actually wrote the book starting April 2020 after our first lockdowns. And it became very clear that I wasn't going to be traveling for a while. And that really was the opportunity to then do a lot more of reading and thinking and writing. And so it's a very practical reason why the why now, if you like.
Absolutely. Since you alluded to the pandemic and the last 23 months, let me ask you, what has changed in the last 23 months? And how did you utilize it both personally and professionally, especially keeping the changes in mind?
So, I have to say, I feel extremely fortunate in terms of having, a comfortable place to live in, a family very nearby. So therefore, a lot of good family time. So far, touch wood, I've avoided COVID as well. And the family broadly has avoided COVID as well. So we feel very fortunate in all of those respects. Having said that, I mean, the one big thing that I miss is meeting friends. That's the big miss. I don't miss travel. I used to travel a tremendous amount every week pretty well. And it suddenly stopped, but I really don't miss the travel. And if I think about how life will be different as things normalize going forward, my intention is that the days of traveling, going to Delhi or going somewhere else for one meeting of an hour or two, those days are over. It's not worth doing. Those meetings should be held virtually. And if they can't be held virtually, not held at all. When one travels, at least my intention now and what I've been practicing for the last few months is longer trips, more intense trips, good time with people who you want to spend time with, lunch with them, dinner with them. So in more intense engagement when you're actually physically with people, and then the rest of it online. So I think these 23 months have been good learning. Initially, like everyone else, we were wondering what hit us. It was a scramble to get things back on track in the company. As things stabilize, then starting to think forward, starting to think about future business, starting to think about investment in new capabilities. All the things that I think good companies did in the course of the pandemic. So really, given where we are now, I just say I feel fortunate, and I feel that we're in an okay place looking forward.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes, for outlining how a business leader's approach to travel and engaging with the stakeholders may have changed. We've seen virtual board meetings. We've seen virtual policy consultations. So clearly, a lot of this, we are doing this conversation virtually.
Yes.
So a lot can happen, yes, but the need to be able to face and meet friends and be more deeply into the conversation.
Yes.
And sometimes be able to hug, shake a hand. I think that need will not go away. Now let's get into the book. Sure. I have a copy of the book, so I will show it. The Struggle and the Promise. Dr. Forbes has it right in his background.
Yes, yeah.
So clearly now let's look at the book in detail. Dr. Forbes, the book has 11 chapters. Which is your favorite chapter and why?
So, I love that question. If I had to pick one chapter, I think I'd pick chapter 10, which is the chapter on culture. And the reason I like that chapter so much is because of two things. One is I think it's an interesting argument that I'm making, an argument about our diversity and pluralism as a country, that given our diversity and pluralism, that how do we make this into a great asset? Yes, as I say in the chapter, it limits some policy options. It limits a very interventionist state, for example, because in a very diverse country like us, if you have too close a business and government relationship, it's usually suspect. Regardless of which government and which industry, it's suspect. While in a much more homogenous country, you tend to say, okay, no, we'll trust them. So it's fine. We don't think there's anything going on if business and government are close together. So I think it limits the scope for policy intervention, but it also is a huge strength for us because it means that we have huge soft power. We have the ability to attract almost any country in terms of its involvement with us and wanting to work with us more and seeing us as a benign presence. So we have many, many assets. So I think there's an interesting argument in the chapter, and it's also fun. It's the chapter which has the largest number of Lakshman cartoons in it. And it's also, I think, a chapter with some very good quotes in it. So I think it's a combination of an interesting argument and fun, which makes for a good output at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Now let me start by why this name. Of course, the name gives it away. The Struggle and the Promise, Restoring India's Potential. When you use the word restore, somewhere there is a thought process that we lost out. We couldn't capitalize. We missed the bus. Give us a sense of why do you feel so?
So, the restoring name actually was a later addition in the course of 2021. And it really is a reflection of our experience as a country in the second wave of COVID. Because the second wave of COVID was so devastating. It was so damaging to so many lives, to so many families around the country, to so many millions of people, really, and also to our reputation as a country, because we had terrible press coverage within the country, and we had terrible press coverage outside of the country. And at a stroke, we undid a reputation that we built up over the last 30 years. And so the restoring actually is a very specific reflection of that trauma at the time. And I actually went through the book again, starting, I held off. The first draft was done in March 2021. Terrible timing in retrospect. And the first full draft, edited and all of that. And I held off until June to actually send in the book to the publisher because of the trauma we were going through. And I went through the book and reflected on what the second wave of COVID should teach us as a country, and the Restoring Our Potential name subtitle came into the book as a result of that, because it seemed to me that before we could talk about leading the world, we needed to first restore our reputation and restore our credibility as a potential leader.
Yes, and while criticism is welcome because it helps us be on our toes, look at it and improve whatever we believe in we can improve. But I did write a piece after that. I actually wrote it in November, I think around the 25th November, when I saw a CNN article which said 1 billion vaccinated, but millions go without a first dose. And I did write, and I've been an observer of media for more than 2 decades. And in my view, that was a unfair comment, and I will send you that piece. And I feel while we need to fix a lot that we need to fix in India, sometimes the positives of India don't get highlighted.
I fully agree. We got very negative press coverage in the second wave. Some of it was entirely unfair. Some of it was a reflection of the fact that people could come in and take photographs freely. And it's a reflection, therefore, of us being an open society and a liberal democracy. Some of it was a reflection of, some of it was a reflection of that because we all speak English, because we're so accessible, it's just easier to cover India. And by the way, the example that you gave is precisely one of the points I make in the book, that look, one of the ways in which we are actually getting about restoring our potential and restoring our reputation is through the vaccination campaign. And I can quibble and say, listen, the target that was set end of December, we didn't hit that target, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, but at the end of the day, the vaccination campaign, I think, is a great success story. To have actually vaccinated, administered now close to 7 billion doses of vaccines, I think that's a great achievement by any standard.
And also look at it in the context of what America has achieved. They're still starting with vaccination because of some, anti-vaccination conversations. Look at Europe, especially what happened in the last 4 months. In that context, what happened in India, was bad. But, I think they need to fix their house before they can preach. But let's focus on the book now.
Yes. But just to say, I think what you're talking about is exactly right. It's that I think the what we see in the US, where they've plateaued at around, I think they've plateaued at around 65% or something like that vaccination. And that's a reflection of a highly polarized society with deep underlying trouble and rifts in it. And the reason I'm making that point is because actually in the culture chapter, one of the big messages is that we have a real opportunity, because in a sense, we're on a development path where everything is getting to be more abundant for us as a country. People should be looking by the million to lives getting better. And as lives get better, we have a chance to unify everyone around some common broader goals. And I think that's what we have to do.
Absolutely, Dr. Forbes. Now, in your first chapter, you talk about, can India really inspire to lead? Tell us how.
So I actually say, can we really aspire to lead?
Aspire to lead. Sorry.
Yeah, aspire to lead. And we can. I argue that we can aspire to lead, and we can aspire to lead because the criteria for leadership are. There are a few criteria for leadership. First, to aspire to lead, you need to be quite inclusive. So a larger proportion of your population must participate in progress than in other countries where the ability to lead is less. Second, you have simple scale and size. You need to be of a certain size, and we are of that size. We are of that size, certainly in terms of population. And as we progress economically, we're increasingly of that size in terms of economic size and heft. Third, I think countries that we look to for leadership have to be attractive they have to be culturally attractive. China is 5 times our size economically today. So they're way ahead of us economically. But culturally, we're a much more attractive place for the rest of the world. We're seen as a much more benign force. We're seen as a much more welcome entity as Indian industry investing rather than Chinese industry, etc. We're seen as a much more, when foreigners come to India, they find something that they will like. And there are many examples in the book of our soft power and soft power attractiveness to different parts of the world. And the last piece is we're a private sector-led economy. Our progress does not depend on the wisdom of one individual or the government. It depends on the wisdom of millions of entrepreneurs, millions of NGOs. That collectively is what gives rise to our progress and our economic success. I think you're muted somehow.
As a good practice, when my guest is speaking, I tend to mute it. Mute and unmute have become very important words in the last 2 weeks.
They have. They say that the commonest phrase of the last 23 months is "you're on mute," and the the second commonest phrase is "please go on mute."
So now let's move on to the second chapter in the book, which is on economic policy. And you interestingly say, do less to achieve more. Build on this.
So, I make the argument in many places that we have limited state capacity to implement. And this limited state capacity means that the role of the state is essential, but it needs to be focused on just a few things. And by focusing on just a few things, we can achieve more at the end of the day. Second element is what I was mentioning earlier from the culture chapter, that because we're so diverse, we need a few things that we use as our unifying goals. And then with those few things that we use, we leave the rest to individual initiative and response. So what are those few things? Those few things are, first, rapid growth as the collective goal for us all. This is true. This is an aspiration for all Indians. So regardless of region and community and whatever, it's what everyone wants. So how can we grow at 8, 9, 10% a year on year for the next 20 to 30 years? Because that's what we have to achieve. And we have to set that up as our collective goal for us all. Second, an essential part of achieving rapid economic growth is moving people from lower productivity occupations to higher productivity occupations. What are those higher productivity occupations? Services has been our big employment generator, not manufacturing, but services has been our big employment generator. And this services takes the form of many informal services that we have in our towns and cities. And I think we need to provide some basic protection for this informal labor. So for the people who work at construction sites, the people who work in delivery services, the people who work in small restaurants on the side of the road and so on, they all need, it's a very flexible occupation, but they need some basic protection, some basic health insurance, maybe a few months, 3 months of unemployment insurance. If, as happened in March 2020, you suddenly have restrictions that keep you from earning your living. So you need a certain base level of protection. And if we can provide that base level of protection, we can have high flexibility in our labor force, as we have in informal labor, with some minimum protection. And then the last piece is manufacturing. Manufacturing provides good quality jobs. And we need more and more of these good quality jobs. In services, the big opportunity we have is in tourism. We have a massive untapped tourism opportunity. We're way down the world tourism rankings with everything that tourists find attractive. So really going after our tourism opportunity in a very focused, dramatic way. I use the phrase, we need a tourism czar who will work across union government departments, state governments, etc., to really deliver on our potential there, because tourism can put millions of people to productive work in good jobs. Yeah, so those are my do less to achieve more recommendations.
Next chapter logically flows from there, which is about innovation, and which is about design and design thinking, because we know that design has a functional value. It is a business accelerator. We know innovation can create tremendous value, both in terms of functionality as well as in economic value added. So give us a sense about how we can innovate better, how we can design better.
So, we spend one of the things that I talk about in the book, using other sources as well, is that as a country, our industrial structure is the industrial structure of a richer country than we actually are. We have a more skill and capital intensive industry than most countries at our level of per capita GDP, of wealth. We have most of our industrial output coming from pharma chem, from auto and auto components, from engineering, and less of it coming from garments and textiles, food processing, leather and footwear. Those labor-intensive sectors count for less in our industrial output than you would expect for a country at our level of wealth. Given that, for all these more skill and capital intensive sectors to really see them thrive and grow rapidly, we need to invest a lot more in innovation. In particular, we need to invest a lot more in in-house R&D. And that's really what one of the chapters in the book is about. And if you look at the numbers, we invest 0.3% of GDP in in-house R&D. The world average is 1.5%. That's also what China invests. So we need to scale our investments in in-house R&D by a factor of 5. And we have a huge opportunity to do so because we have abundant talent available in the country. We have millions of engineers. We produce 1 million engineers, over 1 million engineers a year. We have this huge flow of talent. We can use that talent to really lead the world in innovation if Indian industry, and it's a big if, but if Indian industry really sees it as its prime priority to grow its investment in in-house R&D. So that's one of the big, if you like, recommendations in the book. On design, the same. We have good design institutes. We have many great designers, but design is a very small enterprise in India. It needs to be much bigger relative to a China, relative to even a South Korea. Design is a small enterprise in our country. So we need to produce many more designers, and companies, Indian companies, again, need to see design as part of their basic strategy for competing. So take Bajaj Auto and Royal Enfield in motorcycles. They fight each other and compete on the basis of design. If you take Tata Motors and Mahindra and SUVs, they fight each other and compete on the basis of design. We need every sector to do that kind of thing, to see the lead firms in the sector competing one with the other, not on cost, but competing one with the other on design. That's how we will give our wider population better and better items, better and better goods that can make their lives better. That's what design is all about.
Okay. Now, you also have professed in the book that the way to make innovation happen, the design thinking to be there, for us to be able to realize our potential, we have to start with our higher educational institutions, right? And you dedicate a chapter to that. Give us a sense of why it has not happened. At least for more than 2 decades, policymakers have been talking about it, leading industrialists have been talking about it, educationists have been talking about it. Why do you think it hasn't happened and it will happen now?
As I say in the chapter, as many others have pointed out also, our number one, let me start with the first comment. First comment would be that I think we should be impressed with the entrepreneurship we've seen in our higher education system. We've gone in 30 years ago, we produced around, little more, 35 years ago, we produced around 40,000 engineers a year. We now produce over 1 million engineers a year. The state investment has been relatively modest there. It's mainly come, that growth in engineering output, in MBAs, in pharma graduates has mainly come from private institutes. So the education sector has demonstrated its ability to really grow quantity, right? The key challenge is quality, right? We have 37 million students in higher education, second only to China that has 50 million, but 37 million is, a bigger population than, it's more people than exist in 75% of the countries of the world. So we have this huge higher education sector. The challenge is quality. How do you get quality into the higher education system? The way we've tried is by regulating quality into the system. We specify you need so much land area, so much classroom space, these kinds of facilities. That really isn't the point. The point of higher education is, do you have good teachers, right? And are they around and are they teaching well? Do we have good students? We have great students, right? We need those good teachers to be teaching well. How do you get that to happen? How do you get institutes to focus on what really matters, which is teaching quality? It's through competition and autonomy. So you need those 2 engines instead of regulation. So instead of trying to regulate quality into our higher education system, free the higher education system to compete one with the other, to add courses and volume and so on as they wish, and give them the freedom to do it. So the freedom is the autonomy. The competition is the mechanism that will deliver quality at the end of the day. So that's really the recommendation of the higher education chapter.
Okay, now you also talk about, when you talk of innovation and science and technology and building product companies and building capabilities, you talk of funding public research at a much bigger scale, right? Give us a sense of what do you expect to happen over the next decade or so?
So, in terms of public R&D, public research, government-funded research, India actually is more or less at the world average in terms of overall public funding of R&D. We're at about 0.5% of GDP, which is the world average. Where we do that research is different in India, and that's what keeps it from having impact. We do it in autonomous government R&D laboratories, either within the defense establishment, the defense R&D laboratories, or agricultural laboratories, or the Department of Atomic Energy, or the Department of Space, or CSIR, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. And the recommendation of the chapter on public research is that when we look at R&D, the government should continue to fund the R&D, but where it should not do the R&D in these autonomous institutes. The R&D should instead be done as follows. If it's technological research for defense, for space, for atomic energy, do it in industry. So fund it in government, do it in industry. That's how the world does it too. Second, if it's scientific research, fund it by the government, as the world does, do it in higher education instead of in autonomous institutes. So the basic message, if you like, is keep funding R&D as you do, but shift where you do it from these autonomous institutes into industry and into higher education. The last budget earlier this month has a proposal that 25% of defense R&D in the country can now be done not only within the DRDO laboratory setup, it can now be done in industry and it can be done in higher education. It's a very welcome move. It may seem like a small step, 25% of one segment, but I think it's a change in direction and it's potentially quite transformative. We have to see that that gets carried through in an effective way. It can be hugely beneficial to our country's wider innovation system if properly implemented.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. Using this analogy that you've given about our engineering capability, if we look at healthcare, which we've seen in the last 2 years is the biggest need we have both for preventive healthcare and curative healthcare, mental well-being, emotional well-being, the manpower in that domain is abysmal. And the leading practitioners in healthcare have been, at least for the last 1 decade, been asking to be able to get norms that increase the capability to produce more doctors. Of course, in terms of paramedical, we've done some progress, but in terms of doctors, still there are old archaic rules and you understand the dynamics in play there. How will we, in your view, be able to grow the bench strength on doctors in India?
So the way in which we can really improve the quality of any education, including doctors, is by ensuring this research being done within the higher education sector. One of the gaps in our public R&D funding in the country is the very limited public R&D funding that goes into healthcare research. If you look at public R&D funding in the US, in all of Europe, in Japan, in South Korea, the largest single item is healthcare. It's usually even higher than spending on defense R&D. For us, healthcare funding of public R&D is tiny in the country. It's about 2% of the national R&D, of the public R&D funding. If you look at the numbers for the US and Europe and so on, it's typically over 35%. So it's much, it's like a couple of order of magnitudes higher in much of the world than it is for us. So the first thing we need to do is to reallocate our public R&D funding and focus it on healthcare because it has such huge payoffs. If that R&D funding happens then within the higher education sector, we end up producing better quality doctors because they will be taught by doctors in the system who are doing much more R&D, who are much more cutting edge in their work, who have much better equipment to practice and learn on. all of this will improve the quality of the doctors that we produce, and we can produce more doctors as well.
Dr. Forbes, let me also, we're talking almost 3+ weeks after the budget. What is your comment on the budget? What does the budget wish to achieve? And what is your overall commentary on the budget?
I thought the budget, I thought the budget was a good budget. In particular, I thought the emphasis on capex and infrastructure investment by the government was very welcome. It was, I think it's necessary, number one. It will have long-term economic benefits for us. And it also has short-term economic benefits, because the most direct way in which a union budget can contribute to employment creation is by infrastructure spending, by building roads and dams and airports and so on. Construction really is the number one employment generator in that sense. So short-term benefits from employment creation, long-term benefits from making the economy more efficient by reducing logistics costs and so on. The one miss in the budget, in my view, was, by the way, the other measure that I really welcomed was the defense R&D point that I made earlier. The one miss in, if you ask me, in the budget was an emphasis on education and the implementation of the government's new education policy. It's a good policy. It has the right provisions for school education, the right provisions for higher education. We must see it start becoming reality. So, for example, the new education policy has a proposal in there that a national research foundation will be set up, and this national research foundation will be funded with 50,000 crores. Now, that 50,000 crores has to come from the budget. It's not there in this year's budget. So I think we need to see those kinds of moves forward to turn the new education policy into reality on the ground. I'm quite fine if some of these moves, like, for example, the school education outcomes, which has to be done through the state governments, because school education is a state subject in our country, I think some of that can be done off budget. So I'm quite fine if it's done off budget, but it has to be done. So to me, that's the one big miss. I think the focus on capex was right. The move to get the defense R&D spending more widely spread around higher education and industry is exactly right. I think the big miss was the implementation of the new education policy. And one could argue about the investments needed in public health, which I think is also a miss in the budget.
Okay. Smita Santoki is asking a question. First part you already answered, which is in education. The second question Smita is asking you is, what is your biggest source of inspiration that keeps you going every day?
Well, so let me give you my, that's a great question. To me, I used to teach a course at Stanford for many years. And people used to always ask me, which did I enjoy more, teaching there or working here in industry? And I used to always say, look, I really love the course, great students. I love the teaching, love the content. But I recognize that I made much less of a difference there. I make much more of a difference here. Maybe it's only my ego that says that I make more of a difference here. But I was clear that if Stanford had never heard of me, they would be no worse a university. So I didn't make much difference to the place. Here, I feel I make much more of a difference. And that gives me enormous satisfaction. So it's really the ability to contribute. It's whether you contribute in your company by making a difference, whether you contribute by working in an association like CII or STEER or, take STEER. We set up STEER as a think tank to focus on innovation policy, because we simply said, listen, we need to make innovation policy a bigger issue of public debate in our country, a more prominent issue in the public discourse. There's no need to do that in the US. There's no need to do that in France, say. It's already there. Here, we have an opportunity to do something like this. In the university that we're trying to start as a group of CI members, we have an opportunity and a need to do this. That's what keeps me going. It's the ability to contribute, to make a difference, it gives you satisfaction. You go to sleep each night happy.
Absolutely. It's the ability to make a difference in someone's life and to give your best. And I would say, Dr. Forbes, I'm much younger than you, and I have a long way to go, and hopefully accomplish a bit of what you've done. But I must tell you that just being alive is a big motivation. It may sound very, basic, if I may say, but the fact is, I've seen my 3 friends die, a colleague die. Just being able to breathe every morning is a blessing. And it's a way, and then of course you have family, your responsibility, you still have dreams and aspirations. And really, I think it's a great time to be able to make an impact, both in terms of business and in terms of social impact. And somewhere the social impact part and the business part intertwine, So clearly you're making an impact in all those domains. Now, let me ask you, the last 2 years have also seen IPOs from tech companies. Talk about innovation in the book. And there's been a lot of talk about the valuation of these tech companies. Dr. Forbes, somebody who's built a very large enterprise, who's taught in Stanford, who's been involved in policy making as the president of a leading chambers of commerce. What is your view on the valuation of these technology companies?
Well, I think the general view would be that they're grossly overvalued. But I don't know. I've always, when people would say, how do you make money on the stock exchange? And I would always say to them that, look, you should keep very close track of what I do and do the opposite. Being
modest, but
I would tend to go for fundamentals. So I would tend to go for what's the underlying business model, what's the revenue model. Some of these new age companies have a good revenue model, and if they're making money and they're growing and adding users, that to me sounds very positive. For those which are only adding users and don't have a robust revenue model, I wouldn't look at them as an investment opportunity. So but I'm saying that's me. That's I'm sort of an old school investor. I expect a valuable company to also be profitable.
Okay.
No, it's an outdated concept.
Yes, but Dr. Forbes, I will give you a contrarian view, which is also held by many. And if you look at, let's say, Amazon 21 years back, people said it's overvalued, and look at where it is. So clearly, sometimes innovation takes leaps and frogs. You're investing in the future, and some bit is FOMO also, fear of missing out, and that also drives the valuations. But the fact is,
Amazon is a good example of what I'm talking about. It's a marginally profitable company. It makes a profit by accident every so often, and I don't understand it. Why? To me, it doesn't make sense. But that's why I'm saying that don't do what I do as an investor.
But, Amazon also has Amazon Prime, which
which is very profitable.
Be able to bring consumers. There's the Amazon Web Services, and the only thing I'd say, Dr. Forbes, is even then Amazon had a clear path to profitability, which was long term. It was not a short term. But they were, you have the pioneer's burden of being able to build an industry. And just to give you one data, the e-commerce market was 16% of the retailing market before COVID. But in the last 2 years, that 16% has become 27%. So in 24 months, we've added 11%. In 20 years, we added 16%. So clearly, there is value in digital enterprises, and some may manifest. Yes, there is also a case of overpricing of IPOs, which is by itself a different discussion. But now let me ask you 2 more questions. One is, Dr. Forbes, you've achieved so much. You built an enterprise, you've given back in more ways than one. You become an author. What more for Dr. Forbes? Is there a bucket list that Dr. Naushad Forbes has?
I mean, it's this thing of contributing each day, and enjoyment. It's both, right? I get a lot of pleasure out of contributing, but I also get pleasure out of the good things in life. I get pleasure out of meeting friends, of having really good meals, as I say in the book, having very good whiskey. These are the things that give me pleasure, and those are the things that I want to spend more time doing as I get older. There are countries that I wish to visit that I have not been to, Greece or Morocco or whatever. So there's a bucket list that includes things like that. And then there's one big item on my bucket list, which is creating this world-class university. I think the experiments that we are seeing with Ashoka and Ahmedabad University and Kriya, Plaksha, these are very welcome. But we need a few dozen of these world-class full-service universities. If we as a group of CI members can collectively come together and create this world-class university, I think that will be a very big check mark on my bucket list.
Yes, and Smita Santoki is saying, please start it in Pune, sir.
I'd love to. I wish there was greater interest and take up in the state. So.
Let me ask my last two questions before I bring my senior editor, Mr. Romail Amin, to ask one or two questions. One is, what are your predictions about India over the next 1 decade? Are we on course to become a 5 trillion economy, especially in the context of, if you see the last 2 months of GST collections, we've done more collections than budgeted. What are your predictions for India over the next decade or so?
So the key question is, what will our growth rate be? And will we become a $5 trillion economy? We'll 100% become a $5 trillion economy. The question of 5 trillion has to be connected with by when. Yeah, the original goal was $5 trillion by 2024. Now we're clear that's not going to happen because of 2 lost years of growth because of COVID and the lockdowns. So the -7% last year, the +9 this year will just about get us back to where we were in March 2020. So 2 lost years. Yeah. So instead of 2024, then we're probably talking 2026. To get there by 2026 to 5 trillion, we need to grow at 9% each year. So that's the expectation this year. That's the expectation. That's what the budget says for next year. It says 8.5%, close enough, right? But then the subsequent 3 years, we also need to grow at 9%. That's the big question. How will we grow at 9% so that we get to 5 trillion by 2026, this revised goal that we must have? I think that's when it needs that investment in human capital that we're talking about. That investment in human capital and creation of millions of jobs. That's the #1 priority for us as a company. As normalcy returns, as more and more of us travel, as tourists start coming back to India, etc., and quick things that we should do is we must restore international flights. We're the only country in the world that has still not restored regular, normal international flights. We still are operating on these bubble arrangements and so on. We have to get over that. As tourism returns, we will start again seeing the kind of widespread job creation in our towns and resorts and so on. That's what will get us our economic growth going. And if we invest in schooling and higher education, I think then we're again setting ourselves up for medium-term success and long-term success. And I think we'll see the results certainly in the next decade. We'll see the results flowing in terms of a more rapid economic growth and a rapid economic growth that is more widespread and that spreads through the population to a greater extent than it has, simply because more and more millions of people are empowered, they are educated to participate in our growth processes. So if I had to predict what will happen, we have the potential to grow at 9% a year for the next decade, it seems to me, without question, but we cannot take it for granted. It requires that we do all of those difficult things that we must do. So we do need, we have in September 2020, there were several labor laws that were passed. Those laws have not yet been notified by the union government. They must be notified first by the union government, then by the state governments. They're a good move in getting the balance, starting to get the balance right between flexibility and protection for all labor. We must see that start to happen across the country and then take that further. We need to work on, as I said, tourism as this big opportunity across the country as a big long-term growth driver for us. And I will keep coming back to manufacturing and say, Indian industry has to worry about investment in R&D. The government has to worry about how we can be an attractive destination for labor-intensive manufacturing. There are lots of opportunities still there for us that can put millions of people to work. Those are the things that we need to do. And if we get those right, then we have not only a great future for the next decade, but longer term, for the next generation, for the next 20 years, 30 years, such that the next generation will live in a much richer, more prosperous, more generally good living population.
Absolutely, Dr. Forbes. There is appreciation for the session, but there's a question from Anish Sheikh. He says, one of the issues that we have in India is that we're a very unequal society. And you talk about inclusiveness, you talk about culture, you talk about the role of the government, and you have a forward by Dr. Manmohan Singh, and so on and so forth. How do we become more even in terms of income distribution as we go? This has been a goal for at least 2 decades, if not more, but the disparity seems to be increasing rather than kind of disappearing.
The inclusive development is not only it's essential from a social perspective, it's also good economics, because the more widespread wealth is in the country, the more we'll see consumption taking place. And if we can include 1.4 billion people in our growth prospects, we'll create wealth for all of Indian industry and for most of the world's industry also for the next 30 years. So it's a great opportunity that we have. How do we do it? I think I'll come back to the same point about schooling and public health, public education, public health. We have to get these right, because that's the number one enabler of including the population in the wider development of the country. Then there are other essential roles for the state. So one of the ways in which you include people you say that every citizen of India has the same rights. So police and judicial reform. When you have those two operating effectively, then the average citizen feels secure. I can feel secure because I have 2 watchmen, throughout the day, etc. I mean, you shouldn't need that. As a developed society, we should be a safe society because we're a safe society. And I think, really finding ways in which the criminal justice system operates much more effectively, the police operates much more impartially. These are our priorities for government action. And if we get that right, then we will, I think, progress very significantly in the direction of inclusion. Last comment on inclusion is from the point of view of government revenue. I make this point in the book, and many other economists have too, that I believe very strongly in modest tax rates with very few or no exemptions and with wide coverage. If one can somehow combine those things, that you have modest rates, you have wide coverage, and you don't have exemptions, then you have a more inclusive tax system. Because otherwise, what do you have? You have a system where, for example, today in the country, you have a very small number of personal income taxpayers, right? The salaried class, basically, as everyone keeps pointing out. People who are in trade pay less tax than they should, sometimes no tax. People who are in agriculture don't pay any tax, even if they have high earnings, and some do at very high levels. Some of our leading politicians too, by the way, right? But it's agricultural income, it's not taxed, right? So I'm saying you can start getting at some of this. You can say that, listen, let's start by taxing agricultural income over 1 crore a year. So start at a very high level and say that, listen, over 1 crore a year, you pay personal income tax, even if it's agricultural income. Improve the coverage, get the coverage to happen across all people on the basis of their earnings and not on the basis of exemptions. Avoid exemptions. The same is true of GST. Increase the coverage, reduce the rate, and get rid of the exemptions. This exemption of all enterprises up to 1.5 crores is far too high. Make the exemption limit 10 lakhs instead of 1.5 crores. These are the kinds of things that we should be doing to make our overall institutional setup, our laws, our tax system, our police, our judiciary, our education system more inclusive. So inclusive it requires action on many fronts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Forbes. Again, some participants are asking for an autograph book. I'd say that we do a business literature festival, and we'll invite Dr. Forbes to that, and I'm sure he can sign some copies. And
it would be my privilege. Thank you.
My last question, and I'll bring Ruhail into the conversation, is of course I will recommend your book, and we'll recommend your book. And let me hold it again.
Thank you.
But let me ask you. And I always ask this to an author, which is a book recently that you enjoyed reading apart from your own book? Would you like to recommend 1 or 2 books?
So I'll recommend 2 books. One very old book and 1 new book. The new book, which is a serious book, is by S. Rukmini, who's a data journalist in the country. And it's a book called Whole Data and Half Truths. And it's all about the data and the facts and so on about the country. And I recommend it very highly. It's a really interesting, good read. It was recommended by my niece to me, and I really have been enjoying it and learning a great deal from it. The second book that I'm reading, I'm a big P.G. Wodehouse fan. There are lots of quotes from P.G. Wodehouse in the book. And typically at any point in time, I'm reading a serious book and I'm reading a P.G. Wodehouse. So I'm currently reading a P.G. Wodehouse book called Uncle Fred in the Springtime, probably for the 5th time. It's one of my favorites. If you want good writing, read P.G. Wodehouse.
Thank you so much. I'll bring Mr. Ruhail Amin, our senior editor, and he'll ask you the last set of questions and while I listen on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Batra and Dr. Forbes. Of course, you have touched upon all the major points, but I just want to reiterate to something that you earlier referred to, which is about the culture, inclusivity and culture. We pride ourselves on the culture we have. We are being hired globally for the way we work, the work ethic we have. But have we failed to leverage it internally? What can be done to lure people to stay and contribute to the robust story of India's growth?
So, I think we saw from the mid-90s onwards, we saw a certain reverse migration that started to happen in the country. And that reverse migration was very healthy. Yes, it happened at the top end. It happened sort of Indians working for multinationals overseas in various positions came back to India to head those multinational operations in India. And then many of them settled in India, stayed on, raised their families here and so on. I think in the last few years, we've seen, unfortunately, a little bit of a reverse migration of entrepreneurs, certainly. And people setting up operations in Dubai or Singapore or London or whatever. I think that's unfortunate. And I think we should really understand why we see that happening. Is it that people don't see the economic potential to really be here and invest? Is it that they feel socially more comfortable? These are the questions, they're serious and big questions that we need to address.
Or I don't intend to interrupt, or the ways of doing business have changed. And, you can read in between the lines. In some cases, I'm not saying in all cases, different drivers of the decision, but just wanted to make that point.
No, I agree. And, the ways of doing business should change in a positive direction, and, I'll give you a couple. There was a recent report that was put out by the Team Lease Foundation that showed, I think, that 16,000 civil offenses have criminal charges that are possible. These are within the Commercial Code of India. There are 16,000 criminal offenses. I mean, this government has done a good job in starting to work on decriminalizing civil offenses and commercial offenses. Obviously, there's much, much more work to be done. Those 16,000, it's a nice long list that they've provided. I think they've done us a great service. We should get to work on them because it's these kinds of things. It's one entrepreneur who ends up getting arrested for some stupid reason, for an offense that later on ends up being by mistake, right? These are things that then I think trigger the wrong kind of action. So I would go back to that, that how do we make ourselves first a really attractive place for people, all overseas citizens of India. We've made the rules more complex. We've sort of said that if you have an OCI card, that doesn't make you eligible for journalistic activities. Why? Why did we make that change? Because some journalist wrote something criticizing the government. We shouldn't be so touchy. Let's have broad shoulders and say, listen, we welcome everyone to come into the country and live here, whether they are, certainly if they're people of Indian origin, we should encourage it. And if they're foreigners, we should encourage that too, because we should be the destination of choice for people of talent all over the world. I think that's what we have to. We have to set ourselves that as the goal. And by the way, the reason I make this argument for leadership is just that. I say, if we say leadership, we have to be judged by a higher standard than anyone else. So we can't be picky and we can't be, oversensitive about someone criticized us or something. So what if they criticized us? If they criticize us, it's their problem, right? I mean, we should simply brush it off and move on with the things that we have to do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Forbes. Thank you, Ruhail. Dr. Forbes, whatever little I've achieved in life is because I try and read more than anyone, but my administrative and business responsibilities sometimes don't do justice. I definitely buy more books than anyone I know. Not sure. Two books that I've recently enjoyed reading. One I've gifted. One is a book by Anthony Robbins and his two co-authors, Peter Diamandis and Robert Hariri. It's called Life Force. And it's about how to be able to bring that life force, add years to your life. It's built on talking to experts in regenerative medicine and people who are healers. And it brings science and practice and intuition. It's a lovely book, and I would recommend you read it. And second is another book, The Art of the Good Life. It is 52 Surprising Shortcuts to Happiness, Wealth, and success by Rolf Dobelli, who also wrote this book that sold very well, The Art of Thinking Clearly. And it's the storytelling. I mean, some of the things that the authors talk about, we know, but it's how it's told and also the anecdotal stuff. So thank you, Dr. Forbes, for talking to us. We look forward to more conversations at BW Business World with you. We look forward to more engagement with you. And clearly, education is your passion that came across in the book, because you gave it as a solution for achieving everything else that you say. And that's the right approach. So we wish you luck in the success of this book. And I'm sure it'll be a bestseller and make the right impact with the right set of people. Congratulations. Thank you for talking to us at BW Business World. And those of you who missed the conversation, you can watch the complete conversation on the BW Business World YouTube channel, or you can read the transcript in the next issue of BW Business World, which is our most influential women issue. Look or read the transcript and interview on businessworld.in. Thank you so much, Dr. Forbes. I enjoyed the conversation. Our audience enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did. And congratulations.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you.
Very kind.